Welcome everyone to the program. Let's kick off this hour with the Apex Court's decision on 4 governorship seats, the legal tussles which have now been brought to a close. The elections of 4 state governors have been affirmed by the Supreme Court, which delivered judgment on the suits in the petitions challenging them. Well, after listening to separate appeals on the outcomes of the elections in the estates, the 7-man panel, led by Justice Olabode Rhodes-Viver, in a unanimous judgment, upheld the elections of Governor Kezie Ikpeazu of Abia State, Darius Ishaku of Taraba State, Ifeanyi Okowa of Delta State, and Abubakar Bello of Niger State. Our correspondent Amaka Okafo has the report.
4 governors were declared winners by the Supreme Court as judges of the Apex Court uphold their election and dismiss all appeals challenging their victories. The Supreme Court affirmed the election of Governor Kezie Ikpeazu of Abia State. In a judgment delivered by Justice Paul Galunje, the court held that the appellant, Mr. Alex Oti, did not establish his claims of overvoting. To prove this allegation, the court said there are crucial documents which the appellant must tender to prove his case. However, the appellant did not do so. It merely dumped Form EC8A and EC8B before the court and did not call any witness to prove his allegations of overvoting.
The judgment was indeed quite lucid, and we are not unhappy that no cost was awarded, because we would not even want any money that will contaminate our own money.
It was also victory for Governor Ifeanyi Okowa of Delta State as the Apex Court upheld his election. In a judgment delivered by Justice Santos Nweze, the court held that the appellant, Mr. Great Ogboru, failed to prove allegations of overvoting. Justice Nweze said the decision of the Apex Court on the position of card readers are too numerous to begin to mention for the appellant to claim that they are not aware of it. Justice Nweze ruled that the appeal was a waste of the court's precious time. The appellant, Mr. Great Ogboru, had argued through his lawyer that a total of 411,000 votes were accrued to the governor in error in 15 local government areas.
Looking at the papers from beginning, we knew it was a waste of time, so we're not surprised at all.
It is a judgment of the Supreme Court, which is the last court of the land. So there's nothing else anybody can do.
Also, the Supreme Court affirmed the re-election of Mr. Darius Ishaku of Taraba State. In a unanimous judgment delivered by Justice Ejembieko, the court held that the appeal was an academic exercise since the governorship candidate of the All Progressive Congress was disqualified from participating in the election. Counsel to the APC, Mr. Ishaku Diko, had told the court to replace the disqualified candidate with the first runner-up at the party's primary and order a rerun election in the state. The Supreme Court concluded the day's proceedings by upholding the election of Governor Abubakar Bello of Niger State. The Apex Court said it lacked jurisdiction to hear the appeal because there is no judgment emanating from the Niger State Election Tribunal, since it was cut up by the 180 days stipulated by law for a tribunal to hear an election matter.
For the past 1 year, the People's Democratic Party, PDP, has been at it that the governor of Niger State, His Excellency Alhaji Abubakar Sani Bello, submitted false documents to INEC. First and foremost, they tried at the Federal High Court, Minna, they lost. They went on appeal to Court of Appeal, they lost. They went again back to the tribunal, they lost. Court of Appeal, they lost, and today again the Supreme Court has thrown out their appeal.
With these judgments, the Apex Court has brought to an end controversies surrounding all of these elections. Amaka Okafo, Channels Television News.
And now it's the morning after, and reactions are already trailing the outcome of the Supreme Court on those 4 governorship seats, while their challengers have, retired to their fate. Some of the governors consider it an end to the distraction that has trailed their victory at the polls. Niger State Governor Abubakar Bello believes it is a landmark victory and a validation of the people's mandate. He, however, restated his government's commitments to operating an all-inclusive government which will allow everyone contribute to the development of Niger State. On his part, Governor Ifeanyi Okowa is urging his rival, Great Ogboru of the All Progressives Congress, to join in his Stronger Delta agenda. According to him, driving the Stronger Delta agenda of his administration remains the main objective of his government.
While you are in the court, there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of distraction. But the distractions are over. It is time for us to work together as brothers and ensure that we develop our state. And it's also time for us to call on our review our opponents who were in the court with us. It is time for us to heal the wounds. Our arms are wide open. We are ready to accept people to work with us. If they have suggestions, they can put it on the table. Together we can build a stronger Delta. So I call on Great Okoro and his followers to join us in the building of a stronger and better Delta. It's time to concentrate on governance, and that's why I have to offer the appeal to all those who are in government with me. It's time for us to work for the state. Even our brothers who are in the National Assembly, it is time to work for the state and to work for the nation. It's not time for us to politic, because people are expecting a lot from us, and we do not need to distract ourselves or allow other people to distract us.
Well, let's discuss the political implications of the judgments. I'm now being joined by a political analyst, Dr. Hamisu Abdurrahman. Thank you so much for joining us. He joins us from Abuja studios. Now, did you expect anything different from the Supreme Court judgments yesterday?
Well, the judgment has come and gone. What is left is the post-mortem of the various judgments. I want to draw attention to where we are in 2015 elections and where we are now. Prior to the 2015 elections, we have this very particular process where victories are determined at the court, given by validity to what the people have decided on the field. And with the introduction of the card reader, we saw that reversed to the extent that most of the cases that made it to the Supreme Court at the end of the day were pre-election cases, not election cases. But where we are now is a return to the past, where we are having to return to the court to validate whatever choices the people have made. If you look at the judgment clearly, some of which really said the people that are equally seeking to either nullify or to be declared as the winner of the elections did not prove their cases beyond reasonable doubt. But if you estray what transpired on the day of elections, you will see pockets of electoral violence, you will see pockets of overvoting. So in as much as our judges will say that the charges of non-compliance is not substantial enough to invalidate the outcome, I think those that are alleging one form of impropriety or the other have the right to justice. And if you estray most of the report of the observers, you could see some of these very particular issues that the complainants are really raising in the court. So,
Rahman, if we look at a few of the cases that, as you're mentioning right now, take, for example, that of Delta State. Now, Justice Nweze, in his judgment filed by Great Okoro against the election of Governor Okowa, held that the appellant nailed himself by dumping documents on the tribunal without demonstrating them as required by law. And even though, indeed, Mr. Okoro said that the voters accredited were different from the voters that were ascribed to the governor of Delta State, they didn't prove allegations of overvoting. And if we take a look at the Abia State case, overvoting was also not successfully established. So if we look at all of this coming from the Supreme Court judgment, was it worth taking the cases, the issues to court in the first place?
Well, there are two factors that are responsible for this. One is the belief by the politicians that they can always get what they want in the court. And because, again, our courts are not court of law, they are not court of justice, they are court of law. So it is about technicality. It's not about justice. It's not about really having to assuage the fears and the concerns of the parties that are complaining to the court. So if we are not careful, we may be back to the era of Operation Whittier, where people will take laws into their hands because they feel they are not getting a judgment that is depicting justice in the court of law. So one thing is to commit a crime. Another thing, again, is to be able is for the person that is at the receiving end to really prove that a crime has been committed. So the case, I'm sorry to say this, but the case of electoral malfeasance in this country is equivalent to the case of rape. a victim may be raped, but the victim may not be able to prove that she was raped. So it doesn't mean that if the victim is not able to prove that she was raped, that rape did not occur. What we are saying is simple. We want a situation whereby we can have a smooth electoral process that respects the wishes of the people from the ballot boxes, and then it ends there. We don't want a situation whereby people will feel that the system is not giving them the justice they required, either through the ballot box or in the court. And then
Finally,
once we arrive at this very particular position, we will descend to where we were those days, where people were doused with petrol and they are set ablaze. We don't want to get to that position. So
interesting
all we are saying
analogy.
is
Finally,
the election
Dr.
has come-
Abdurrahman, just because we're running out of time, to get your final thoughts, I mean, moving ahead, some of them have said this is now an end to the distractions. Do you expect any change in governance, developments for the people of those states?
Of course. Governor Okoa described it the way it's supposed to be. The problem has been that once elections are held, most of the sitting governors are not able to take the bull by the horn and then get forward-looking to deliver on the promises they've made because of the fear that the tribunal judgment or the Supreme Court judgment may go the other way. So governance is always really impaired. And then even the resources of the state. If you look at the quantum of resources that is wasted on prosecuting these cases, you sympathize with the state because most of the resources are the resources of the state. And it's unfortunate that we find ourselves in this situation.
All right, we'd like to appreciate your insight to this issue. Political analyst Dr. Hamisu Abdurrahman, many thanks for joining us on the program.